Hi friends, today what I'm going to demo for you is I'm going to demo the freeform apple tart. This tart is going to make enough for four individual tarts. I'm not going to make four. I'm only going to make two because I'm the only one in my house that's going to eat them and I don't want to waste ingredients. So I will show you the ingredients for both tarts. The recipe that you have on the online on Classroom, I'm going to modify just a little bit different. I'm going to make sure that I use tools that everybody has at home. You can do this in a food processor if you want to. I'm not going to get my food processor out because I figure not everybody has one. I'm just going to make some modifications. And again, my recipe is only serving two, whereas yours is going to serve four. All right. So to make my dough, I'm going to start off with 1 stick of butter here, and I've already cut it up, and I cut it into small dice or medium dice, and I went ahead and put it in the freezer for about 5 minutes so that it's going to stay really, 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 really cold. For my flour, I have 4 ounces of flour, and I have a ½ teaspoon of salt in here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use my strainer to sift the ingredients together. And so I'm just going to gently shake that there so that all the ingredients get through there. If you don't have a strainer or a sifter at home, you can use a whisk just to mix it up. Make sure that there's no clumps in there. In order to start the process, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use either a pastry blender, this tool here, or 2 knives in order to cut in the butter. I'm going to go ahead and use the pastry blender to show you guys how to cut the fat in. You only want to leave your butter in the freezer for about 5 minutes, otherwise it's going to be way too hard to cut apart. Excuse me, let me back up. So just use this kind of like a rocking motion and turn the bowl while you're at it. If you don't have a pastry blender at home, and some of you might not, there's a couple other tools that you can use in order to cut the fat into small pieces. One thing you can use is you can use 2 knives, and you can legitimately go in there and pull them opposite of each other and cut that fat into tiny little pieces. You can also use the side of a fork or use 2 forks and just go through there and cut that fat into really tiny little pieces. We want like pea-sized particles. So you can do this. It does take a little bit longer, but it's just as effective. If you do have a food processor at home and you want to use a food processor, you can just use that the exact same way that the directions in the recipe tell you to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and now that my butter is cut into nice tiny little pieces, I'm going to go ahead and add the ice cold water. Now we're not adding the ice to here, but just the water. So I'm going to take a tablespoon at a time and I'm going to drizzle it in. And then each time I add a tablespoon, I'm going to use a fork and I'm just going to kind of mix it around. And it's not looking like it's doing a whole lot, but we don't want a wet dough. We just want the perfect ratio of water to flour so that we're able to hydrate the flour but not have a paste. So do that a couple times. And by the time you get to the 3rd one, if it seems like it's too dry, you can add a little bit more, and I would do a ½ tablespoon at a time because you don't want to add that water, because if you add too much water, you're going to get a really tough gluten and you're not going to have an ideal crust, and nobody wants a tough pie crust. And I'm going to add my last one, and we'll see if that's enough. Looking pretty good. You can see that it's starting to form together, and once I'm done mixing it around and making sure that all that flour is hydrated, I'm going to see if I can pinch it together and if it will form a ball. So now I'm going to check that. I'm going to squeeze it in my hand, and that's perfect. Okay, so I have turned my dough out onto the surface, and I'm going to just use my hands to make sure that it's all formed together, and I'm going to knead it just slightly. I'm going to add all of these extra pieces back in, and then I'm going to divide it into 2. If you are making your tart for 4, then you're going to divide yours into 4. And then we're going to shape them into little bitty discs, and then we're going to wrap them in saran wrap. So I'm going to get a sharp knife. I'm going to use a chef's knife here, and I'm going to just cut it in half. I'm going to eyeball that. You could weigh it if you had a scale. And then I'm going to turn each one of those into like a little hockey puck. And then once you have that in the shape that you want it to be, cover it with some saran wrap, and then you're going to pop that in the freezer. Okay, and I'm gonna put these in the freezer for 20 minutes and then they'll be ready once we're done with our filling. Okay, whenever you have your ingredients mise en place for the filling, go ahead and take your apples that are pre-cut. So they've been peeled, they've been cored, they've been sliced into a medium dice. If you have a couple apples that have peeling on it, just pull those out. And we're gonna start to let those brown in a pan. There's no butter or there's no fat in this at all. So we're just gonna let it heat up for a minute or so until the apples start to brown. They're starting to brown. When you turn them a little bit, go ahead and add your butter. I'm doing a half of a recipe, so I'm only adding 1 tablespoon. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and let that melt in there. And then once it has melted completely, I will go ahead and I'll move it around. Once it's melted, we'll cook it for about 1 minute longer. Okay, now that the apples have cooked for about a minute with the butter, I'm gonna go ahead and add the cinnamon and the sugar, and I'm gonna combine that, and I'm gonna keep mixing that until all the sugar has melted. And then once that is complete, I'm gonna go ahead and add the vanilla. So it's just really fragrant now. There's gonna be a strong smell. I'm gonna turn my pan down just a little bit so it's not on high, so I don't burn the sugar. I just wanna caramelize it. And then, after everything's evenly coated, the sugar's melted, I'm gonna go ahead and add my vanilla. And then I'm gonna just, if you're cooking the rest of it today, go ahead and get your pie crust back out. So, I'm gonna add my vanilla. Ooh, it smells delicious. Okay. Then you can just transfer it back to that original bowl. After about 20 minutes, you're gonna get your disc of dough out again, and you're gonna put it on a lightly floured surface. If you have a piece of parchment paper, you can put it down as well. And you're gonna start rolling it with a rolling pin, or if you don't have a rolling pin, you can use like a wine bottle, or even like a big bottle of like tomatoes. You could use that as well, something just long and heavy. And you're gonna roll from the center out, and I like to turn mine every like quarter turn in order just to make sure that it's not sticking to the bottom. So I'm just gonna pick that up and turn it. If it seems like it's sticking to your rolling pin at all, go ahead and just throw a little bit of flour on there. But we don't want to add a whole bunch of extra flour because that's going to cause excess gluten to develop, and we know how that goes. So just make sure that it's just slightly dusted with flour, and then keep rolling. So you can either get a ruler, or you can get a like a small dinner plate, and that measures about 8 inches across, and use that as your guide. Okay, so once your dough is rolled about 8 inches wide across, you can use a ruler. Go ahead and put your plate on top of it, your small dinner plate, and take a paring knife and just use that as your guide to cut around. We just want a pretty nice circle. So just cut off those extra pieces, pull those away from the side. And then you're gonna have your dough all ready for the filling. So remember, I'm only making 2. If you're making 4, you're gonna use 1/4 of the filling, and you're gonna put it right there in the center. And you're gonna just kind of make a little pile, evenly spread out. And then I like to use a butter knife to make sure that it's loose and that it's not stuck to the parchment paper or stuck to your work surface. Go ahead and just run that butter knife around so that you have all edges loose. And then you're gonna start by pulling in one edge. So I'm gonna pull on the edge closest to the camera there, and I'm gonna just kind of crease it. And then I'm gonna turn my parchment paper, and again, make sure it's not stuck using your knife. And I'm just gonna make little folds. And those little folds are going to be what holds my filling in. So I'm gonna fold up. And I'm gonna fold up one more time. So you might do it 4 or 5 times. And then I'm gonna grab my egg wash. So we do want some of the apples poking out there, and you can pinch the edges back if you want it all to be nice and pretty. Whenever that heat hits those apples, they're gonna caramelize, and like the sugar that we put in there is gonna get nice and bubbly and brown, and the sugar that's naturally released from those apples are gonna kind of bubble out a little bit. Okay, so I have 1 egg and 2 tablespoons of milk that I've made my egg wash with. And I'm going to go ahead and mix that together. Then I'm going to use, if you have a pastry brush, great. If not, just use a spoon and spoon it over. And I'm gonna use an egg wash on the crust. And that's gonna help to create some brownness on my crust and also create some flavor. So it's really gonna end up being prettier in the end. Then I'm gonna transfer this to a parchment paper. I'm going to cook it at 425 degrees for, oh gosh, how long is it? I feel like it's 20 minutes. It's 400 degrees. Bake it for about 20 minutes. And then at the end, right before you serve it, we're gonna sprinkle it with some powdered sugar.
I love powdered. 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, after your tarts have been in there and they're starting nicely brown, go ahead and take them out. If you want to add a little bit more color, you can leave them in for about a minute longer. And then once you have had them there, you can see that they are all baked. Let them sit for about a minute on here, and then we're going to transfer them over to the pan.
Do I stop it?